Hey guys, it's Khalil,
Hey, it's Chad.
and we are the Marshals of Truth. So we are moving on to we're getting closer, to the end of our Peace Be Freedom series, this very long series, and we are moving beyond technically what we would call the Peace at War mini episode. To really the end of the Cold War, which is slightly different than the peace out of war. Because right with this one, we're talking about Reagan. We're talking about Reagan's aggressive push to end the Cold War, recognize how great America was, and how much of a failed state the USSR and other communist/socialist states were. And for this, we would like to call the next two, maybe three episodes, What So Proudly We Hailed. Because Reagan was a very patriotic, very proud American. He recognized what was so different about America to other nations in the world and what made it so great at balancing peace and freedom. Um, and he did that. I could not find any better proof of his recognition than the RNC address in 1980, aka Peace Through Strength. So, in this speech, quote, he said, "It is the responsibility of the President of the United States in working for peace to ensure that the safety of our people cannot successfully be threatened by a hostile foreign power. As President, fulfilling that responsibility will be my number one priority. We are not a warlike people, quite the opposite. We always seek to live in peace. We resort to force infrequently and with great reluctance, and only after we have determined that it is absolutely necessary." End quote. Again, using that great point that Americans are not a warlike people. The peace movements before World War One and World War Two made a great example of that. Wilson in 1916 got reelected because he didn't bring the American people into war. That's how great the peace movement was. And again, the peace movement before World War II, people did not want to be drawn into another war. So the people, again, making the same point that Wilson made in 1917 with his Safe for Democracy speech. The Americans are not a warlike people. They only go to war, when the freedom of their people or other people are being harmed. That is not a cynical thing. That is not something that bad people do. If other people's freedom are being brought down and challenged and threatened, why wouldn't you intervene? Why wouldn't you? If you saw a crime being committed in the alleyway of a glorious city, are you? Well, you may not personally intervene, you would call the cops, but if you saw that it was an immediate danger and the person being threatened was close to death, close to, in this case, being beaten down by the idea that they don't want freedom, then and if you have the strength to intervene, you intervene. And hopefully, as Reagan would make clear in this address, that the President of the United States, in working for peace, hopes to make war so scary and so dangerous that it would never be attempted by any adversary of the United States. That freedom, not just in America but internationally, would be defended so with such strong a force that the forces of evil, the forces against freedom, would be terrified of disturbing that peace to confront the monster that is Ronald Reagan of the United States. So,
Yeah.
quote, "We are awed, and rightfully so, by the forces of destruction at loose in the world in this nuclear era. But neither can we be naive or foolish. 4 times in my lifetime, America has gone to war, bleeding the lives of its young men into the sands of beachheads, the fields of Europe, and the jungles and rice paddies of Asia. We know only too well that war comes not when the forces of freedom are strong, but when they are weak. It is then that tyrants are tempted. We simply cannot learn these lessons the hard way again without risking our destruction. Of all the objectives we seek, first and foremost is the establishment of lasting world peace." end quote. So world peace means, oh my God, Chad, what does world peace
Well, if you look at absolute world peace, that means no freedom. But if you look in this quote, you could see what he really means by this idea of lasting world peace. Earlier on, he says in there, when the forces are freedom, oh no, we know all too well that war comes when the forces of freedom are strong, not when the forces of freedom are strong, but when they are weak, end quote. So, when the forces of the freedom embracing countries, of the liberal countries, when they are weak, this is when this disorder, this is when this chaos, when this lack of peace comes. It is when there's this lack of strength within the freedom loving countries, when there's this weakness in the freedom. Because at the end of the day, what makes America, another liberal system, strong is when there is freedom within our countries, when there is freedom to protest to make them better. Of course, as we explained all throughout this series, what makes us great is our ability to change and people having the ability to do so. When that idea of freedom is weak, when we cower to the needs of dictators and autocrats who want to simply expand their countries and ward off the ideas of freedom within theirs, when we don't embrace that freedom not just within our country but around the world, when we let that happen, that's when there isn't peace. And so, in order to get this lasting world peace that he mentions, I don't see it as reaching this ideal peace of there being no freedom, because that's what absolute peace is, no freedom. I don't see it as that, but I see this peace of being when the freedom of these countries are strong, when the freedom in the United States, in Britain, in the West, in the world is strong, that's when there can be peace. When there's freedom in these countries, they will not be revolting, they will not be fighting, they will be cooperating because they have the freedom to not just love their government, but to change it to make it better. There won't be this fighting because the freedom is strong. And so that's how I see that's that peace that he mentions, not the peace that these dictator wants in that the loyalty is forced at gunpoint, but the peace in which the freedom in every country around the world, the freedom throughout the world, is strong enough to ward off these selfish desires of these dictators and autocrats.
And again, that's really what Reagan is going on about right here. And in the next quote, which is actually just a continuation of this section of Reagan's RNC speech, he's making the point in really the whole speech, but again, and particularly this section of the speech, that his opponent, his sure-to-be opponent in the 1980 presidential election, general election, was going to be the president, current president at that point, the incumbent president, Democratic president, Jimmy Carter. And because of the Iran hostage crisis, and other foreign policy failures, it was seen that America was holding back and not really fighting for democracy as much as it should. That it was allowing the forces of evil, those that don't want that balance between peace and freedom, to thrive. And he makes the point that Ronald Reagan himself is the embodiment of America as a defense of global freedom. And by freedom he means the balance of freedom with peace. Because America, while America just it's surrounded by nations that are not as free as it. It's surrounded by nations that prioritize peace way much more than it prioritizes freedom. So, whether it be Bush, both Bushes, or Reagan or Biden, they or Obama, they will all say we want to advance the cause of freedom. But that's because all the adversaries of the United States, they're not as free as America. They're actually less free. The adversaries of America always prioritize peace. They're not as free as America. The USSR was not as free as America. Cuba was not as free as America. China right now is not as free as America. Russia isn't as free as America. Iran and the current Taliban-led Afghanistan are not. They are all adversaries of America, and they all prioritize peace. They're not as free. So when an American leader says we must prioritize peace, we must bring. I mean, we must prioritize freedom and bring forward freedom to a society. They're talking about um, they're talking about the fact that America is more free than its adversaries. It's a better balance, because it gets closer to having freedom and peace. It's getting closer to that utopia that More, Plato, and Marx were really talking about, just with that little sense of common sense human organization, to keep people intact. So, anyway, quote, we must always stand ready to negotiate in good faith, ready to pursue a reasonable avenue that holds forth the premise of lessening tensions and furthering the prospects of peace. But let our freedoms and those who may wish us ill take note. The United States has an obligation to its citizens and to the people of the world never to let those who would destroy freedom dictate the future course of human life on this planet. And I would regard my election as proof that we have renewed our resolve to preserve world peace and freedom. This nation will once again be strong enough to do that. End quote. He is again pulling at peace and freedom, because America ideally it wants both of those. It recognizes that better than chaos and order, it's a more practical realization of the pragmatic reality of of humankind, that better than order and chaos, it is a balance between two things that we both know that we want. We all want peace, but we also all want freedom. You'll realize you want both once you live in a society that has complete peace. And you'll also realize you want peace when you live in a society that has complete freedom. Because America is a democracy, and Reagan is making the case in this speech that he is the better candidate. He's saying that he represents the America that defends global democracy, that would
Right.
never let freedom be weakened by those that prioritize peace, not just in America, but in the world. Because again, as we're saying, freedom and peace balanced, the American system and other liberal democracies like it, they they're not just American ideals or Western ideals. That's why the golden billion theory doesn't make a whole lot of sense. You know, like they are human ideals. No people should be beyond the grasp of freedom. People want to be free.
Yep, it is part of our human nature. It is intrinsic that once again sets us apart from the animals across the earth, is that we have this freedom, this free will, self-determination. We could choose what we want to do, how we think, how we act, who we want to marry, what we want to buy, where we want to live. These are ideas that aren't localized to just some country or just some region or just some continent. These are species wide. This is for all mankind. We believe that freedom is part of who we are. While we may believe we want different varying degrees of it, what we all have is we all want that freedom. We all want some of it. And of course, it is up to the governments in how we do that. But every government needs to recognize that us humans have an intrinsic freedom in us. In that government, these governments must give some of it back to us because that is how we recognize our humanity. We can't just move past it. We can't just change the species yet. We are still humans. We will be humans. And by being humans, we will always be free. And so this idea of Reagan, of which we must have the resolve to preserve the world peace and freedom, to preserve freedom throughout the world, the liberal system, or just the freedom of peoples who do not have it. This comes from, again, the long list of American presidents who have articulated this before him, such as Teddy Roosevelt, who recognized that while our nation has, we have peace and freedom in our country, and while we're not perfect, we cannot sit on the sidelines and want and hope that other countries can figure out their problems for themselves. Sometimes there are issues and atrocities so large that we, as a freedom-loving nation, at least through words, must become involved on the side of freedom in order to secure that for the people and ensure that they could have a piece of the system that we have and value so dearly. And then going forward to Wilson and FDR, who again recognized the ideas that freedom must be defended worldwide, that it can't just be limited to the United States, that freedom is part of our human nature and must be guaranteed throughout all the nations on the earth to whatever degree they please, but it must be there. To Kennedy, who would say that, quote, when one man is enslaved, all are not free, end quote. If there are people throughout the earth who do not have the freedoms that we do, or do not, or are having their freedoms crushed, or oppressed, or suppressed by whatever autocratic regime or dictator says they're doing it in the will of peace, as long as that exists, we are not all free. It is as pointless of us sitting around and doing nothing about it. It is as terrible as that, as it is the communists creating a wall to keep these peoples separate. Because if we have something and we do not give it to others when we definitely can, or we do not show it to others, then what's the point of even having it? When Kennedy said, when one man is enslaved, all are not free, that means when there are countries whose regimes are cracking down on their freedoms, again, we must be involved. If we want this liberal system to be the system of the world, we want this peace to be a peace in which the peace and freedom in every nation on the planet is balanced just as well or better than we do, we must get involved. And this is different than interventions. I mean, people see interventions in which the United States says that we're involved in the freedoms. Sometimes they see it as we trying to do it for our own gain. There's a difference between an autocratic regime which in their country that they chose to elect, that they can participate in, and while they run it terribly, is the system that they chose for themselves. There's a difference between that and regimes that are placed in power through coups or military revolts, which are not at the will of the people, where the people are not involved in their government and do not have the freedoms to oppose or stand against it. That's the difference in what really sees an intervention, in which if there's a government that is going against the wills of the people and is suppressing the freedoms of those people, it is the imperative of a democratic nation like us to get involved and to show that peace and freedom that we have and to guarantee that that country once again recognizes the freedoms that we have intrinsically to who we are. It is our responsibility to do so. And again, that's different than, like I said, a country who had the freedom to choose what government they had and say this chose one we didn't like. That's one that's not exactly justified. But when a government that is suppressing the freedoms of the people, that is against the will of the people, that they have no way to participate in it, that is the antithesis of the liberal system, and that is one that if we want to have a liberal world peace, a liberal world order, that is one we cannot stand for. And so this is what we get with Reagan, is a much harsher stance on this being what we have to do not just in our nation, not just in the United States, but across the world, even even to the most autocratic regimes. We must, if not show, then demonstrate then spread the ideas of peace and freedom that we have to the countries that we believe should, if not have it, they probably do want it intrinsically, the freedoms that we have. We must show that, and that is what Reagan really embodies with not just this speech, but the many others we have after it. This is the idea that he takes, in that our freedom-loving nations must take a harsh stance against these countries who seek to oppress the freedoms that other peoples in the world have that they do not recognize.
There is a final part of this. There is a final excerpt from the part of Reagan's RNC speech that we are quoting, that we've been quoting this episode, that really hit me personally. That really just talks about the character, not just of Americans, but of people. So, it almost makes me think that that in some way, Americans are the words that you use to describe Americans are just words to describe all people. It really helped me come to the conclusion that the balance between peace and freedom, they are they're universally good, okay? And there are no people that live under an autocratic regime that would prefer their situation realistically over an American system. Because the liberal democracy is not just an American idea, it is a human idea. Well, um, not only Americans deserve the balance between peace and freedom. Like it would be the most immoral thing in the world to say that the Russian people don't deserve freedom, or that the Iranian people, or the North Korean people, or the Chinese people do not deserve freedom. That the Venezuelan people do not deserve freedom. The Kurdish people of Turkey don't deserve freedom. It would be the worst thing in the world to say that they do not deserve freedom. So, quoting Reagan, there are no words to express the extraordinary strength and character of this breed of people we call Americans. Everywhere we have met thousands of Democrats, Independents, and Republicans from all economic conditions and walks of life, bound together in that community of shared values of family, work, neighborhood, peace, and freedom. They are concerned, yes, but they are not frightened. They are not disturbed. They are disturbed, but not dismayed. They are the kind of men and women Tom Paine had in mind when he wrote, during the darkest days of the American Revolution, "We have it in our power to begin the world over again." End quote. Reagan's description that the extraordinary strength and character, this breed of people we call Americans. Of course, he was using figurative language. We're not saying that Americans, that there you can be in blood American. I mean, there are Native Americans out there, but no, we're saying, or Reagan was saying, that there is something in the American people that want family, work, neighborhood, peace, and freedom. These are human ideas, and they're not just limited to Americans. If you were going to say that this is only an American idea, you have to say that all people in the world are Americans, which is something we'll get to in Modern Empire. That everyone wants this. Everyone wants family, work, neighborhood, peace, and freedom. Everyone wants this. This is not just a human idea. This is not just an American idea. This is a human idea. All people are Americans if this is what Americans are. People that are defending their freedom in Ukraine, they are Americans. The people in early 2021, from Central America that were escaping, dangerous cartel-controlled areas to make it to the promised land, America, they are Americans. As Nancy Pelosi said early in 2021, they are more American in some ways than some Americans in America that want to follow Trump to the day they die. Because people that want family, work, neighborhood, peace, and freedom, that is a universally good idea. Everyone in the world wants this. You cannot lie to me. People want these things. In their heart, they want those things. Even if they lie in different ways of how they're going to achieve it, they want these things. You can force them and drag them, but once they get to family, work, neighborhood, peace, and freedom, they will be happy for the rest of their life. And not just Americans, is the way that we define it, but everyone.
Yeah, they just might see it as a little different than we do. Their ideas of work, family, these kind of things. It might be a little different in a different country. Maybe it's not this little suburban neighborhood that we Americans can imagine. But at the end of the day, people still want this. They want a community around them who will support them. They want a family who will support them, who they could help raise, who they could help for everyone. They want these ideas. And it may turn out, it may look a little different than what we Americans see, But these are ideas that we as humans want. We want peace. We want freedom. We want family. We want work. We want community. We want these things. And as I said, it may look a little different, but it's hard to deny. You can't really tell me that you do not want some of these things. They are what make us these ideas. If we go all the way to the bare minimum, the ideas of freedom, of peace, these are ideas that we want and need. If we don't already have them already, this is what we want. At the very bottom of it, we need freedom, and so we will want peace in order to keep that in check. But that is the bottom line, and you can't really deny that.
We have it in our power to begin the world over again. First quoted from Tom Paine, as Reagan said during the darkest days of the American Revolution. When he says we, Paine and Reagan, again, he's not just talking about Americans. The we, being humans, want these values. However they manifest themselves in practice, they want these things. Everyone in the world wants these things. Which I'm trying to hold myself back from not moving over to our next main series after we finish these quotes over here from these leaders and moving up to modern day, of the idea of the modern empire. That you can remake the world upon the ideas of these universally good values that everyone wants: peace and freedom, that balance. Getting closest you can to the fullest extent of both with a balance. Don't let peace get ahead of freedom. Don't let freedom get ahead of peace. You want that balance. And America does that better than any other country. And Americans, or the way that we define them, and Americans living within the territorial integrity of the United States of America, they should not lead themselves to think that only Americans want these things. I hope Reagan didn't mean this when he said this, that everyone wants this. Every freedom-loving people, and every freedom-loving people that wanted to revolt from a tyrannical government, they were Americans in some ways, because they wanted freedom, but they also wanted peace. They wanted family. They wanted work. They wanted neighborhood. They wanted these things. Every freedom-loving people that ever revolted against authority, tyrannical authority, the French people that revolted against their king, they wanted freedom. And should we call them Americans? In a way, I think so. So we'll have to move on unless Chad has something to say to finish off. But it connects to what we're going to finish off with in the last episode of this series, and especially so as we move on to the modern empire. That the ideals upon which all humanity can agree upon: family, work, neighborhood, peace, and freedom. They, because they are universally good ideas, and because they're human ideas, not just American ideas, they must be spread around the world. If they're ideas that everyone can get behind, why have anything different? Maybe there might be arguments over how it's practiced, and that's okay. But one thing you'll notice about American leaders even is that with very few exceptions, if the people, if they put their backing behind a government, and that government, with checks on their power, if they are put into their positions because of the support of their people, then America won't intervene. Who is the American government to say that the French people didn't want Emmanuel Macron earlier this year? They did, because we saw it. We saw it. There's proof of it. He had more votes than Marine Le Pen. They wanted him. Even Viktor Orban, the people wanted him. So America can't say much. We just think that it's not good for them, but we can't do anything against it. Because in a liberal democracy, however which way we want to put it, and Viktor Orban, for example, he's moving it away from a liberal democracy, but the human ideals of uniting the world, on liberal democracy, they they are universal. And I don't know. I just think that maybe there might be something one day that might be able to surpass it in this balance, but we haven't seen it yet. And dictators like Orban, or Erdogan, or Xi Jinping, or Putin, or those of older eras like Milosevic, Hitler, Mussolini, and other, yeah, like other dictators and despots like throughout history. Even those that might have existed in previously democratic societies, they are making it less so, and it's because of the nations of which they took over. They didn't have the institutional backing that would put checks on their power. They didn't have enough safeguards in place to stop those dictators from taking power, which is why Americans, the universal global American that wants freedom and peace, they need to look around and notice when their leader is getting out of line. Even if they're doing things that they want, a populist will use the things that the people want to gain power, and then to use it to take away the people's freedom. And I think Viktor Orban is a really good example of that. But of course, in the last series, we went through a lot of other nationalist dictators that are very similar. So anyway, Chad, do you have anything else to say about we have it in our power to begin the world over again?
I would think so, and I think we do with this idea of liberalism. And I think you summed it up pretty well on just the ideas of pretty much all that I wanted to say. And that basically just backed up again by the quote that Kennedy said in 1963: when one man is enslaved, all are not free. When we have these ideas of peace and freedom, and we have them, other people do want them. We cannot sit idly aside as dictators and autocrats abuse their powers and suppress their freedoms and in their goals of peace, or maybe not even peace, of just power. We cannot sit idly by as they do so. We must step in. That is the responsibility of liberal democracies. Um, and with that, that's about where we want to end this episode off. We kind of got to a good natural ending point, and we'll continue on with Reagan and his ideas of how we, as the free nations, as the free world, must continue the fight to preserve freedom not just in our countries, but again in the world, for all those who desire the freedoms that we do, which at the end of the day can be said to be most, if not the entire world. If they want that, we must help provide, and that is what the free world should do. And Reagan would say that the best way to do that is through a peace which must be gained through institutional and mechanical strength. So with that, we'll continue on in the next episodes with Reagan and other speakers on this topic. We are the Marshals of the Truth, and we'll see you in the next one.